is a moment that arrives for almost everyone who has ever done any serious inner work, and it arrives without warning, without ceremony, and without any of the drama that its significance deserves. It is not a breakdown. It is not a revelation in the spiritual sense. It is quieter than that and harder than that and more useful than almost any other realization a human being can have. The moment is simply this: the help you have been waiting for is not coming. The person who was supposed to arrive and make it easier, the circumstances that were supposed to shift and make it possible, the version of events in which someone finally sees what you need and provides it without your having to ask. None of it is coming. Not because the world is cruel, not because you are undeserving, not because the people around you are inadequate, but because the specific help you have been waiting for is not the kind of help that arrives from the outside. It is the kind that can only be generated from within. And the waiting was always just a way of postponing the moment when you would have to generate it yourself. Most people never have this moment cleanly. They approach it, feel its edges, and then retreat, back into the waiting, back into the hoping, back into the quiet and mostly unconscious expectation that the right circumstances or the right person or the right timing will eventually arrive and relieve them of the responsibility of being the primary agent in their own life. The retreat is understandable. The moment is uncomfortable. The moment requires something that most of us were never taught how to supply: the radical acceptance of full responsibility for the interior life, in the absence of any guarantee that the responsibility, once accepted, will produce the outcomes we were hoping for. This video is about that moment, about what it actually means to arrive at it and not retreat, about the specific psychological transformation that becomes possible on the other side of it, and about what the depth tradition understood about this passage. The passage from a self that is organized around waiting for rescue to a self that is organized around generating its own direction, that the modern culture has almost completely forgotten. Let's begin with the rescue fantasy, because that is the correct name for the pattern we are describing, and naming it correctly is the first step towards seeing it clearly. The rescue fantasy is not a single, explicit belief. It is a distributed orientation, a way of relating to your own life that is so deeply embedded in the structure of your assumptions that you do not experience it as a fantasy at all. You experience it as just how you are waiting for things to develop, just being patient, just giving it time. The rescue fantasy does not announce itself as a fantasy. It disguises itself as realism, as the reasonable response to circumstances that are genuinely not yet ready, as the mature acknowledgement that you cannot force things, as the spiritual wisdom of allowing rather than controlling. And sometimes, in specific situations, these framings are accurate. Sometimes patience is the right response. Sometimes the circumstances genuinely are not yet ready. Sometimes allowing is the wiser move than forcing. The rescue fantasy is not identified by any single instance of waiting. It is identified by the pattern, by the fact that the waiting is never followed by the generating, by the fact that the patience is always extending forward rather than eventually becoming action, by the fact that the allowing never produces the moment when you stop allowing external conditions to determine your interior state and start determining it yourself. The rescue fantasy is the pattern in which the conditions for beginning are always just slightly ahead of where you currently are, just out of reach, just on the other side of the next development. And the development, when it arrives, reveals a new set of conditions that are also just slightly ahead. The finish line that moves. The psychological roots of the rescue fantasy are in the original experience of dependency. When you were small, you were genuinely dependent. Your survival, your comfort, your emotional regulation, your sense of safety, all of it was genuinely contingent on what the people around you provided. You could not generate it yourself. You did not have the interior resources. The generation of those resources was the developmental task of childhood, and when the childhood environment provided the right conditions, the task was largely accomplished. But many childhoods, most in one degree or another, did not fully provide the right conditions. The emotional regulation was not fully modeled. The sense of safety was not fully established. The interior resource that would have allowed the growing person to eventually stop needing the regulation and the safety to come from outside was never fully built. And the adult who emerged from that childhood carries, in the architecture of their interior, the remnant of the dependency. The waiting for the thing that did not fully arrive. The expectation, running quietly beneath the adult surface, that eventually the right person or the right circumstances will provide what the original environment did not. This is the rescue fantasy in its deepest form. Not the waiting for a romantic partner to solve your loneliness, though that is one expression of it. Not the waiting for a career breakthrough to solve your sense of inadequacy, though that is another. The deepest form is the waiting for something outside to complete the interior development that the original environment did not finish. The waiting for the experience, the relationship, the recognition, the success that will finally produce the sense of being enough that the childhood environment was supposed to produce and did not. And the deepest truth about this waiting, the truth that the moment of no rescue reveals, is that the thing being waited for cannot arrive from the outside. Not because the outside is stingy, but because the inside is where it lives. The sense of being enough is not an experience that is given. It is a capacity that is built, and the building is interior work. And the interior work cannot be done by anyone other than you. If something in this is pressing on something that has been waiting to be pressed on, take 1 second now and subscribe. The work we do here is the work of the interior, the layer below the waiting, where the actual building takes place. Subscribe and hit the bell. Now let's go into what the moment actually requires, because understanding the diagnosis is not the same as doing the work. The moment of no rescue, the genuine arrival at the recognition that the help is not coming from outside, requires 3 specific things, and they have to happen in order. The first is grief. Not the performance of grief, not the intellectual acknowledgement that the thing you were waiting for is not coming, but the actual felt experience of the loss. Because there is a real loss here. The rescue fantasy was not just a mistake. It was, in many cases, a genuine and necessary hope. The hope that the original deficit would eventually be filled. That the love that was incomplete would eventually be completed. That the safety that was not established would eventually arrive. Letting go of this hope is not a simple cognitive correction. It is a mourning, and the mourning, if it is genuine, has the quality of grief. The sadness of a thing that was hoped for and will not come. The anger at the original deprivation that made the hope necessary. The disorientation of a self that has been organized around a waiting that is now over. This grief is not comfortable and it is not quick, but it is necessary, because the self that has not grieved the loss of the rescue fantasy is the self that will quietly reinstall it, in a new form, with a new object, in a new relationship or a new circumstance, and begin waiting again. The grief is what makes the reinstallation less likely. The grief is what allows the waiting to actually end. The second thing the moment requires is the acceptance of the asymmetry. The asymmetry between what you needed and what you received. Between what the original environment was supposed to provide and what it actually provided. Between the childhood that would have produced a fully resourced adult and the childhood that actually occurred. This acceptance is not forgiveness in the sentimental sense. It is not the erasure of the damage or the minimization of the deprivation. It is something more precise. It is the willingness to hold, simultaneously and without collapsing either, both the fact of the deficit and the refusal to be defined by it. To say clearly and without self-pity and without self-deception, this was not given to me, and I am going to build it anyway. The asymmetry is real. The childhood was what it was. The deprivation was genuine. and the adult that emerged from it is the one who has to do the building. Not because it is not fair, but because fair is not the variable. Possible is the variable, and the building is possible. It requires resources that the original environment did not provide. But those resources can be developed in the adult through the specific work of integration of shadow work, of the slow and patient reconstruction of the interior architecture that the original environment left incomplete. The acceptance of the asymmetry is the moment when that work becomes available. When the energy that was going into the waiting, into the hoping that the asymmetry would be corrected from outside, is freed for the building. The third thing the moment requires is the most simple and the most difficult. It is the first act. Not the plan, not the intention, not the commitment in principle, the actual first act. The first small, specific, concrete thing done toward the interior building that the waiting was preventing. It does not have to be large. In fact, it should not be large, because the large gesture is the ego's version of the rescue fantasy applied to the work itself. The idea that if the first act is dramatic enough, the transformation will be proportionally dramatic, and the rescue will arrive from within in the same form that was being waited for from without. The actual first act is small, unglamorous, a conversation had honestly rather than strategically, a feeling felt rather than managed, a choice made from the actual self rather than from the persona, a thing said that is true rather than acceptable. One act, small, real, and then another, and then another. The accumulation of small real acts over time is what builds the interior architecture. Not the single dramatic gesture, the 1,000 unglamorous ones. Here is what changes when the moment is met and the work begins. The first thing that changes is the relationship to other people. Not immediately, and not in a way that is visible from the outside at first, but in the interior. The people who were in your life as objects of the rescue fantasy, the ones you were relating to not quite as themselves but as potential sources of the thing you were waiting to receive, begin to become slowly more actual, more themselves. You begin to be able to see them as they are rather than as they might be if they provided the thing. And seeing people as they are, rather than as potential rescuers, is the beginning of actual relationship, of connection between two real people rather than between a waiting person and a hoped-for provider. The relationships that form from this place are qualitatively different from the ones that formed while the rescue fantasy was running. They are less urgent, less charged with the specific electricity of the hope that this one will be the one that finally delivers. And they are more real, more mutual, more actually nourishing, because they are not being asked to carry the weight of the unfinished development that the rescue fantasy was hoping they would complete. The second thing that changes is the experience of difficulty. Before the moment, difficulty in your life, setbacks, obstacles, failures, losses, had a specific and particular quality. They felt like evidence. Evidence that the rescue was still necessary, that you were not yet sufficient to the demands of your life, that the help you were waiting for was if anything more urgently needed than ever. Difficulty confirmed the rescue fantasy because difficulty confirmed the deficit. After the moment, when the building has begun, difficulty changes its meaning. Not because it becomes less painful. Difficulty is still painful, but it stops being evidence of your insufficiency and starts being information about the work. Specific, precise, sometimes hard to receive information about where the building is incomplete, where the interior architecture has a gap, where the work needs to go next. Difficulty becomes instructive rather than confirming. And an instructive difficulty is a fundamentally different experience from a confirming one, because the instructive difficulty is pointing forward, toward the specific work that needs to be done, while the confirming difficulty is pointing nowhere, because it is simply confirming what the rescue fantasy already believed, that you are not yet sufficient, that the rescue is still needed, that the conditions are still not ready. The third thing that changes is the experience of time. The rescue fantasy lives in a specific relationship to time, one in which the present is always the waiting room and the actual life is always in the future, contingent on the arrival of the condition that is coming. Time in the rescue fantasy is a corridor. You are moving through it toward something that is ahead. The present is not the destination. The present is the passage. And in the passage, nothing is quite real yet, because the real thing is what happens when you arrive. After the moment, when the waiting ends and the building begins, the relationship to time changes. The present becomes the location of the work. The here and now is where the building is happening, not the place you are moving through on the way to somewhere real, the place where the real thing is occurring. And this shift from the present as corridor to the present as location is one of the most significant changes in the quality of inner life that any human being can experience, because it is the shift from being absent from your own life to being present in it. And presence, even in an imperfect and incomplete life, is more nourishing than absence, even in a life that is waiting to become perfect. There is something the depth tradition said about this passage that I want to end with, because it frames the whole of what we have been discussing in the terms that make it most useful. The tradition understood that the development of the self, the individuation, the building of the interior architecture that the original environment left incomplete, was not optional. It was not one among several possible approaches to a human life. It was the work, the central, unavoidable, always available work of being a human being. And the tradition was clear that the work could be delayed indefinitely, that the rescue fantasy could be sustained for an entire lifetime, that a person could arrive at the end of their days still in the waiting room, still in the corridor, still in the before. It is possible to live a whole life in the rescue fantasy and never meet the moment. But the tradition was also clear about what was available to the person who did meet the moment, who grieved the loss of the rescue, accepted the asymmetry, and took the first small act toward the building. The tradition called what became available individuation, the process of becoming, across time and through work, the specific and whole and actual person that was always there beneath the waiting. And the tradition said that this process, once genuinely begun, had a specific quality that no other project in a human life had, could not be taken away. The thing built in the interior, the architecture of genuine self-sufficiency, the capacity to generate from within what the rescue was supposed to provide from without, was not contingent on external circumstances. It could not be lost to a relationship ending, a career collapsing, a social world withdrawing its approval. It was built in the place that circumstances could not reach. And the person who had built it carried, in every room they entered and every life situation they faced, something that the person still in the waiting room did not have. They carried themselves, the actual self built, inhabited, present, not the waiting self, not the hoping self, not the self that was organized around the arrival of something that was not coming, the self that arrived, the one that was always available from the first moment, if only the waiting had ended. The waiting can end today, not with a dramatic gesture, with the grief that is honest, with the acceptance that is clear, with the first small act that is real, and then another, and then another. Nobody is coming to save you, and that is the most liberating thing you will ever know. If this reached the place that the waiting has been living, do something now. Write in the comments these 3 words: I save myself. Just that. Because writing it is the first act. And the first act is the end of the waiting. Give this a like if it moved something real. The next video continues into what the building looks like, the specific interior moves that the work requires, and how to make them when you have never been shown how. It is the most practical continuation of everything we just discussed. I will see you there.